It's NFL draft week, and we have our HBCU top 10 via Gerald Huggins. Oh, yeah. It's locked on HBCU. Play my music.
You are Locked On HBCU, your daily podcast covering HBCU sports. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, family? Welcome back to another episode of the Locked On HBCU podcast, your number one daily one-stop shop for everything HBCU athletics, Monday through Friday, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And I, of course, Sam Darian Gray, a.k.a. the Mouth of the South, Texas Southern alum and former TSU Herald Sports editor and current contributing writer at USA Today's Saints Wire. Thank you for going on this journey with me, making Locked On HBCU your first listen of the day every day. And remember, just because the mic cuts off does not mean that the journey is over. It just means it's time to follow me on Twitter at South Exclusives. Starts with an S and ends with an S. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONCollege to get $20 off your first purchase. It's all about the NFL draft. We'll break down what it takes to be a draftee, the difference between a drafted player and an undrafted player, or at least when they're prospects, comes down to what? But we kick this whole thing off by unveiling the postseason top 10 via our good friend, Gerald Huggins. With our first real draft conversation of draft week, I have our expert, Gerald J. Huggins, here with me, and we're breaking down a top 10 list that we've talked about a couple of times. I'm going to reflect on our preseason top 10 and show what this top 10 looks like, because I think it's always interesting to see where you came from, right? So at the preseason, you had number 10, Carson Vinson, offensive tackle, Alabama A&M, Jacoby Hewitt, wide receiver, Alabama A&M, Kenny Gallup Jr., defensive back, Howard, Carson Hinton, DB Howard, James Burgess, DB Bama State. Then 5 through 1 goes Eric Hunter, linebacker, Morgan State, Kendall Bowler, DB FAMU, Karan Prunty, DB North Carolina A&T, Elijah Williams, defensive tackle, Morgan State, and number 1, Robert McDaniel, DB Jackson State. Now, I'm going to rattle them off again. I'm not going to get the positions this time, but you'll see that Eric Hunter returning to Morgan State, Prunty, I always messed it up, man. I did it when we did this the first time, but Prunty is a guy who he transferred out. So there's obviously some spots that opened up, but things change and players change order. Number 10 goes Kendall Bowler. Then you go going down, Karvansky. Oh, man.
Decius.
I always mess with DC. I always say Decius. I think I'm dyslexic, low-key. But Decius, right? I always flip the C and the I. But anyway, Phillip Webb, Jackson State, James Burgess, Bama State, Kenny Gallup, Howard. Then 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, Aaron Smith, Irv Mulligan, Carson Vinson, Elijah Williams, and Robert McDaniel. These are our old top 10 versus our new top 10. And I think it's important to set a standard of where we've changed, because the thing that I noticed the most, Gerald, is where the defensive backs were. So in the first one, you got McDaniel, you got Prunty, you got Bowler. That's half of the top 5. It's just McDaniel left. It's still well represented, but all the defensive backs are 10 through 6. Was this a disappointment for the season in the secondary?
Not necessarily. They all end up still being top 10, except for one, Carson Hinton, and Carson Hinton's in the top 15. So my thing, and like, I'm a big film guy. Some guys' film just wasn't where it's supposed to be. And then you look at the film, and then I have to, as much as I don't put a lot of as much stock into as others, the athletic testing does come into play. And now I got to turn off what my personal beliefs are and turn it into, okay, how does the league view DBs that may not have a certain amount of athleticism? So all that to say, the guy that remained at the top tested exactly how I figured he was going to test. Like, Rob McDaniel is arguably, outside of Xavier Rubio from Howard, the most athletic defensive back, arguably the most athletic defensive player we have in HBCU football that came out this year. So he stayed on top of him having really good tape. And then I really just stuck to my my characteristics. I stuck to my board and how I like my grading system. And I didn't. One thing I'm learning is if you have a standard, stick to your standard. So I stuck to my standard. Yes, some people were and they weren't. You know, they moved around a lot, but that's because I got to stick to my standard. Because if I start flipping around my standard because I might like a kid personally, then no one's going to respect my work. I think people respect my work. They may not always like it, but they respect my work because it's like, okay, that's a thorough, like, as you can see, the list changed. I have no problem saying I might have been wrong on a guy, but I want to at least be right when it comes down to like, okay, am I at least putting in my top 10 guys that I know can walk into an NFL camp and at least open some eyes and be like, okay, we can't let this guy leave the building kind of situation. So for the most part, my top 10 and arguably the top 15 are guys that I believe will at least get to camp. And I have a draft grade on 3 of the guys, and I have a PFA grade on 12, and the rest are mini camp guys. And then I have like some second tier league like UFL, CFL, you know, grades like that round out my top 25, which we could probably drop at some point. But
and we are going to talk about those different categories that you have because we'll talk about what goes into all of the categories. So I do want to make sure that we do get back to that. But I'll actually, you said something interesting. I didn't want to forget it. But you were talking about how the athletic testing comes into play. I want to ask you, how much does this list change after, let's say, January, February, maybe early February, once we start getting into the shorts and t-shirts, right? Like, how much does this really change late in the process?
So it was something I said I guess I didn't really do as much when I first started scouting. I didn't really, like I said, okay, once I saw the tape, that was it. I didn't really go back and watch it after the pro days and stuff like that. I was like, no, I remember. So this year I said, yeah, let me go back. Let me just look. And, you know, there were some things I might have like overlooked or maybe some things I didn't, you know, be taken into consideration. There's some information I might have gotten like, oh, he might have been hurt this game or something like that. Just stuff that you learn throughout the process. So I'm like, okay, let me go back with more information and just review the tape again. And that's where a guy like a Phillip Webb may pop back in and end up in the top 10 or something like that. You have a Stokes in the top 15, a Jaden Sutton that's number 12, you know what I'm saying? And then you have like Rob stayed the same. Carson, I remember in the beginning of the year, I said, if anyone has the ability to go from 10 to top 3 or number 1 out of anybody, it would be Carson Vinson because he has the highest upside of anybody on that list. And I make that very clear. He has the highest upside. He's 6'7", 314 pounds with 35 inches. He can run at left tackle. Your upside is insane. And he's young. I think he's like 22 years old. So he's young. So it's not like he has a lot left in the tank. So with him, I just don't think out of all the top 10 guys, I just think the 2 guys ahead of him are more ready to, you know, be in an NFL game producing in some sort of capacity over him at the moment. So that's kind of where, like, you know, you differentiate from little things like that. You differentiate from like special teams. So that's what like separated like Carl and Kendall. Carl's a better special teams guy. Carl has longer arms, so you could probably keep him on the outside if you care about the arm lift stuff. Carl tested, but he's a little explosive, so okay. And Carl has shown that he's stronger and has, you know, Carl put up 20 reps on the bench at 188 pounds, 190 pounds. That's 5'11". So like for him to test better, be better on the special teams, and then, you know, Carl had a year where he was arguably the best defensive player, you know, at least by PFF ranking in Black college football. So he has some pedigree there. The only knock on Carl was his long speed, which he probably wanted to deal with too much because he's going to probably be close to the line of scrimmage because he showed that he has the lateral quickness and the strength to be able to play that close. So it's the little things. Now, athletic testing, like we've talked about, it helps a guy and it also really hurt a guy. So now it's like my thought pattern is, can this athleticism translate to when you're on the field with 21 other guys that are arguably some of the most elite athletes at their respective positions on a daily basis, on a weekly basis on the game? Can you handle that? Can you hold up? And the answer to the question is you really don't know. But the idea is you want to at least put the best athlete you can out there and see what happens. So, you know, the list,
it changed a little bit. a little bit.
It's going to change, but I'm not changing anymore.
Yeah,
Draftable
no,
Thursday.
I told him, I said, he said, hey, man, can I push it off to Friday? I said, no. I was like, hold
No,
on.
no,
Hey, but you know what? Something that was interesting in this list I want to bring up because you mentioned Carl versus Kendall is when you go through and you look at this, there's only one cornerback that's still a cornerback, and that's James Burgess. That caught my eye a little bit in the sense that Bowler, nickel, Carl, nickel. I think, well, I kept McDaniels as a DB. We'll talk about that another time. But you see these other cornerbacks, they move in a nickel, but Burgess, you have them still on the outside. Why the difference?
This is a tape thing. Burgess on tape shows that he can be a serviceable outside corner in a zone heavy scheme, like most teams are, in zone heavy scheme with his length and his length and his instincts. And he's a very aggressive press man corner. Now that's the only thing. If you're a press man corner, but you don't have recovery speed, that's scary.
Okay.
But he has the ability to play zone. So he might just need a little bit more extra cushion than others. Or, with him, he knows he has a feel for route combinations and stuff. So he knows what guys are doing. He's instinctual. So yeah, he knows that, hey, I don't think he's a 4.7 guy, whatever he is, whatever the number is. I don't know. No one does laser at pro day, so we'll never really know. Does he look that slow on film? No. Okay. However, we know who are fast, and those are the receivers in the NFL. So what we need to do is put him in situations where we can minimize his ability, or the inability to stay with faster receivers. So what do? Kick him inside a little bit. Maybe there's some safety there because he's a physical guy. He can play a little strong safety. I probably wouldn't put him at free, but he can play a little strong safety, be close to the box. So he'll end up being a big nickel.
You think he's big enough to be a strong safety?
He's 6'2", 200 pounds, 6'3", 200 pounds.
You won't
big safety.
Yeah, tall. I was thinking more weight. I was thinking maybe put on some pounds on, but I guess the NFL will do that, huh?
Yeah, NFL put as much weight on
there. So I guess sometimes I forget prospects are prospects. They are not. This is who you are. Drop them in, and this is just who you'll be. You can add weight on certain players, and I'm assuming you say he has the frame.
He has a frame. I mean, he's the only thing that you can knock Burgess for having small hands, short arms, but he's tall. So it's like, man, like you just don't think of that stuff until you start getting some testing and numbers and measurements. You don't expect James Burgess to have 30-inch arms at 6'3". That's just not something that crossed my mind. So this is how I'm feeling now.
Right.
Imagine guys in the war room with a DB class that's relatively deep, definitely at the corner, but it's kind of top heavy. But for the most part, you have corners there and it doesn't help that you have a small school guy like Siobhan Revel, who's a G5 guy who is same size ideally, but ACL, but he can run. That's not a doubt. He can run. And then you compare him to other small school guys like Isis Waxter, Teron Herring, and stuff like that. So it's not like a separation of him from the other small school guys, but I do like his tape more at corner than the other small school defensive backs for the most part. So I would say Kenny Gallup was the most polarizing because, everybody's trying to pick every little hole in his game to figure out why he's not a pro. But I think when you have a guy like Burgess who literally you watch the tape, you're like, yeah, this kid could do it. And then he tests and you're like, God, you want to trust that tape. You want to trust the tape. You have
to trust the tape, right? And we don't get that luxury, but it is what it is, I guess. I do want to see through the process, though, who rose the most and who dropped the most, because I have one guy in particular that I want to highlight, Irv Mulligan, who I think may be your biggest riser. But we'll look at that as we continue with Locked On HBCU. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONCollege to get $20 off your first Purchase. It doesn't matter if you're lucky enough to have a playoff basketball game in your local area, or maybe a playoff NHL game, or maybe you just have an MLB team. I know that a lot of us are sports fans, so that makes sense. But some of us just like the HBCU athletics, and outside of that, we prefer to go to the opera. We prefer to go to the circus. We prefer to go to the monster truck jam. We prefer to go to a theater play. We prefer to go to comedy shows. If they have tickets to go there, you can find them. It's just that simple. It's up to you, though. It is all on you to go to Gametime, look at what's going on in your local area, and get the best prices guaranteed, including zone deals that'll get you the best price in the best area. So go ahead and go to the Gametime app, download it today, and create an account to get $20 off your first purchase. As we continue rolling on today's episode of Locked on HBCU, I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day every day. For your second listen, make sure you're checking out Locked on NFL Draft. They're talking about exactly what we're talking about, except we're specifying in HBCU prospects. Irv Mulligan, one of my personal favorite players from the season, he rose from outside the club to almost in VIP, to be honest. He's fourth on the list. What did he do in 2024 to become the biggest riser through this process?
Oh man, he just played how he's been playing. He just did it again. The consistency was there. Irv Mulligan, he just kept popping up. He kept running through people. He kept showing that 2, that 10, the 5, the 2, the 10, the 20, the 30, the 40, and then that's just him. He's a true. He can do it all. He showed the ability to run the rock at a high clip. The contact balance, like we said, the short area burst is there. The finishing burst is there. The long speed, not so much, but he is able to go from 0 to 40. He gets you 0 to 40. Might not get you 60, 70, 80, but he'll get you 0 to 40. He has the ability to break tackles without, too much wiggle. He has a little wiggle. He can put strengths and moves together for the most part. But at the end of the day, he just kept popping up, kept running through people's faces. You got to love to see that from a guy that's 5'9", 200 pounds. He probably ended up playing. He probably played a little heavier, to be honest with you. So
looked like it. Well, I think we talked about this last week, though. He definitely looked heavier than 200, sure. 199.
Yeah, and the thing on Irv, like he could receive the ball at the backfield, solid pass blocker too. He just kept showing up, and it helps when you're on a team that's dominating. So it's like it goes a long way. So for Irv, he did everything the right way. He got his touches. He made the most out of his touches, and he continued to just grow throughout the year. And then he capped it off with, putting the team on his back when it came down to it. Him and, someone else on the top 10, actually in the top 5, they had a lot of interaction during that Celebration Bowl. So, that was one of our last looks of Irv Mulligan.
Hey, hold on. I don't like how you tiptoed around it. It's cool. It's Aaron Smith. But like,
yeah,
is that? I know they know, but everybody forgot. But like, did that make a difference between 5 and 4? Was that like a deciding factor, or it's just coincidence?
I won't lie and say I didn't watch that tape more than most, because out of my top 10, how many guys really went up against each other? It's not many. When you look at it,
I don't think it's any.
Pull it up. I'll show you.
It's not, because there's no wide receivers on the list.
No.
So there's nobody to go against the DBs. And did we ever see Elijah versus Vincent? I don't believe we did.
Vincent only went against one guy on that list. No, maybe 2. Sorry, 2. And that's
Vincent versus Webb. So that would be the other one we saw.
Yeah, Webb and right? McDaniel. He went against Webb and McDaniel, and then Irv Mulligan went against Aaron Smith. And yeah, that's it.
That's crazy. Okay. We looked at the list. Who we've established that Mulligan is your biggest riser. That's crazy that we went through this, but who dropped off more than anybody else? Is there somebody who maybe was already on the list, didn't make the list, somebody who was high on the list, dropped on the list?
Yeah, so I will say Keshan Tony, the tight end from State. I had to go back and just really look at it, and then I had to equate the tested numbers and just the size numbers, 6'2", 250 plus. The RAS wasn't that good. Then I had to look at okay, can he run routes? He's not really a a savvy route runner, but he's someone that you get some manufactured touches in. After the catch, he's more linear. He'll break tackles linearly. He'll have some closing bursts because he's just a big guy, but he's not going to really create too much after the catch. Solid blocker. So now is he a true Y? Probably not at 6'2". So that means he's more of an H. But if he's an H and he's not really a profound route runner, what do you do with him? Do you just create, is he like your 6th offensive lineman? But then again, we have tight ends for that in the league that can block serviceably. And, we are a passing league in the league. So what do you need from your H-back? Do you have a situation where you could be a Patrick Ricard? But Pat Ricard is a unicorn. There aren't a lot of Pat Ricards out there for a reason. So with that being said, I had to, I thought of him as a preferred free agent. And I was like mini camp. I was like, okay, the height, weight, speed kind of might have killed him a little bit. The inability to like really get open by himself without being manufactured and stuff like this. So I was like, you know what? I put him as like a, adequate UFL starter, something like that. And that's not a knock. It's just, I'm trying to project you to like, can I see you in the NFL and you're able to create separation and create on your own. And that's just not his game. But I think in a UFL, there's a way he could probably develop into being something more. He could, his world's not over if you go to UFL, CFL. I want people to know that you could always work your way back up. So it's not a knock. Is that when I'm just comparing them to other tight ends in the class, now we have guys that get manufactured touches, but they're a little bit more dynamic with the ball in their hands. He's not a really dynamic guy with the ball in his hands. So
assertive, straightforward.
He's a bull in the china shop. And there's nothing wrong with that. I just don't know if that's going to translate definitely from the FCS level up to, the NFL. So I have him as a second tier league starter, adequate starter at this point. And, I think he dropped, but it's not a knock on him. It's just end of the day. Sometimes you got to go back and review. So I went back and reviewed. And that's what it ended up being. So, yeah.
Well, you know what? We talk about range and all of these things. Let's get into what really makes a draft pick, because that's one of the things we wanted to talk about. We talk about these players in the top 10. I'll flash it up here one more time as we go through it. You got Bowler, Desus, Webb, Burgess, Gallup, Smith, Aaron Smith specifically, Mulligan, Vinson, Elijah Williams, and Robert McDaniel. Those are our top 10 players. The top 3 ain't changed, and we think that those guys will get drafted or have a good chance of getting drafted. But I want to see what sets them apart as we continue and wrap up today's episode of Locked On HBCU. Today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks, and baseball season is in full swing. There's no better way to get in on the action than with Prize Picks, the best place for daily fantasy sports. With Prize Picks, you can pick more or less on at least 2 player projections, and if you're right, you can win up to 1,000 times your cash. Whether it's strikeouts, RBIs, first inning runs, or anything in between, Prize Picks keeps the game exciting. So let's build a lineup. This week, picking Aaron Judge for more than 1 home run and Shohei Ohtani for more than 1 stolen base. It's that simple. I get them both right. Boom. Run it up. Download the app today and use the code LOCKEDONCollege to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONCollege for $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks. Run your game. As we're wrapping up today's episode of Locked On HBCU, I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day every day, making all the way to segment 3. And I thank you 2 times for that. Thank you. Thank you. We look at the top 3 players in our top 10, McDaniel, Williams, and Vinson, and we look at them and say, okay, they stand a chance of getting drafted. But what's that difference between the last person who gets drafted and that first UDFA, right? Like, what is and we don't have to say Mulligan specifically because this is more broad and expands to every single year. But what is that difference between that last guy in and that first guy out?
Team need, positional value, how the draft goes, how deep your position is. A lot of it has nothing to do with your ability, because at the end of the day, I think Elijah's an adequate NFL rotational player early in his career, but that doesn't mean he's going to get drafted in that realm. So that's just what comes with the territory. So like Carson Vinson is probably going to get drafted, has a higher chance of getting drafted than most guys on the list. He has a higher chance of getting drafted more than Rob McDaniel and Elijah Williams, even though I believe those two are better prospects at the moment. But end of the day, 6'7", 314-pound tackle with upside. Now, I don't think he's ready as other guys are, like to play significantly or play adequately early. But I do think there's a chance where like a Vincent could come in. Okay, he's still developing, but okay, we need him as a sixth offensive lineman to just, set the edge or something. Who knows? Now, Elijah, he could be a guy that you throw in there and you get some pass rush juice from a 290-plus pound defensive tackle. And he can play on the edge. He can play in multiple positions just to get some pass rush, and he's good against the run. And Rob McDaniel's arguably the only 3-level defender in this draft. As in someone that can come off the edge, play linebacker, play corner, and play safety. There's no one else that's doing that. Like at a high level. So
that's why they're tier 1.
Right. So there's like the tier.
Okay. But no, go ahead. Yeah. Because I was going to ask somebody. I think you may answer it.
Yeah, the tier of like guys in the draft, like draftable, like they have a grader. Like, okay, based on your tape, your athletic testing, and your production in college, you are worth being drafted. You are a draftable player. You are bare minimum a high end starter on the FCS level, which we can all agree. Elijah and Carson and Rob were high-end starters. And then now that's the baseline. Now you're a high-end starter. Now let's look at your testing. All of them tested very well. So now you're a high-end starter, bare minimum. So that's at least a fringe rotational guy, fringe rotational prospect. And then you can go all the way up to like, for them, adequate rotational just fit, when it comes to the athletic testing, production, and their film. So guys,
okay. But you had these other tiers, right? And we talked about this before and a little bit earlier, but you had the fringe roster prospect, fringe rotational, and adequate rotational.
Mm-hmm.
If you had to give like kind of a sweeping generalization of what each category means, right? Like what would be a rotational player, a fringe rotational versus adequate rotational versus just a fringe prospect? What's the difference between those three categories? As a prospect, like I know what it means when you get to the league, but as a prospect, what is the difference?
So like an adequate rotational guy, like I said, is probably someone that's more like a elite starter, high-end starter on the FCS level. So that's like trying to think of like some guys off the top of my head. Like Jacoby Durant. He was like an elite starter, high-end starter on the FCS level. So he got between that quality rotational, like, okay, you're getting significant snaps on the NFL level as a rotational player. Now, adequate guys, like someone that, we're going to get you some reps gradually. Like you'll come in, be very, very situational based. Like, hey, I'm going to just bring you in just to pass rush here or bring you in just to do this, that, and third. High special teams guy. Then you got your fringe rotation, who was more like leaning on a developmental piece, but we want to kind of get you some reps here and there just to make sure that you're getting your feet wet and stuff like that. And then you have your fringe NFL roster guys who are like, okay, those guys show that they kind of have the ability to play in the league, but they're like certain things that you just want to clean up just based on their archetype, based on how they tested, based on what you see on film. Like, okay, these guys need a little bit more refinement in their game to be successful at the next level. So like you have like an Aaron Smith, right, who's a linebacker that kind of struggles with engagement with offensive linemen and getting off blocks at times. So that's a big no-no. But the athleticism is there, the potential is there, and the production is there. So it's like, you know what? He may be on the fringe of the roster prospect. Let's PFA him, see what we could do. Put him on our special teams, may end up on our practice squad, might end up being a player for us one day. And Irv Mulligan, we all know his one knock is, well, he's not an elite pass catcher. He's serviceable. And then also that he doesn't have the long speed, that you may want. So, okay, we can bring Irv in. He's shown his way, to get extra yardage, get the tough yardage, so we could bring him in slowly. Like, okay, you know what? Bring him in. We need his first down real quick while our guy catches a blow, like I said before, with Jaden Sutton. Similar guys. It's like, okay, we can use them, change the pace, set it up so we get our guy back in the game. We go get into the red zone, score. So, like, those are kind of like how the tiers vary. So it's like, yeah, you have guys like adequate. You're getting good enough playing time so you could just, you're in the game plan. Fringe is like kind of game plan. You better know what you're doing when you do get in there, because you might be able to get up in there. And then when it comes to Fringe roster, it's like, okay, there are things we like, but there are things we could clean up that we might want to see cleaned up before we put you out there. And you'll be a core special teamer for us.
Okay. Now we about to get into the big dogs. All right. This is gonna come out Thursday. This next episode gonna come out Thursday. So next time you see us together, it'll be out on Thursday talking about Robert McDaniel, Carson Vinson, and Elijah Williams, the top 3, the most likely players to hear their name called on probably Saturday. We'll get into those 3 on Thursday. Tomorrow's episode, so Wednesday, you'll be hearing about the change of power at Clark Atlanta, as well as the potential docuseries surrounding Norfolk State. So a lot of big things going on during draft season. I'm excited. I am excited to bring it to you. But in the meantime, between time, until the next time that we hear each other, family, take care, stay blessed. Peace.